challenging. So this is the story that we know most well. We know that there was a census, and we know that that meant there was a big journey. And it also meant there was no space in Bethlehem. So Jesus was born in a manger, and an angel told some shepherds, and some shepherds came to see Jesus. Every childhood nativity, which is still the normal thing in most schools in this country, will tell you those bits of the story. There'll be an innkeeper. There might be some characters in the nativity these days that I never heard of before. Apparently my niece was a cowgirl, complete with having to do a line dance, which she rather cutely described as a lion dance. But despite our efforts to modernise, we can't get away from the facts of the story. Mary and Joseph undertook a very arduous journey. A hard journey to get to what they hoped would be the greatest of joys, the birth of a child. But in those worst of circumstances, that child was born. And then this crowd of dirty strangers showed up to be the first visitors. Now I'd like you to contrast that with a modern British birth story. In the UK today, women who are pregnant are protected, mollycoddled and discouraged from all things remotely difficult and hard to do. And to an extent, I can completely understand it. There are things that are more difficult for me than they used to be. But certainly the concept of sitting on a donkey for several hours at a time every day for a couple of days in order to make a journey does not sound pleasant. And since I'm apparently banned from long-haul flights even in luxury cabins, I don't think that we would get away with that now. Birth is now sanitised, medicalised, and we're encouraged to sterilise everything that goes anywhere near a baby. And yet, in today's world, children are still being born into horrific situations. There are children being born every day in refugee camps, in so-called immigrant caravans making their way across South America, and even here, in poverty and homelessness, there are children being born. Babies don't come when it's convenient and when it's scheduled. And despite our best efforts today to make it all perfect, we can't achieve that. And the circumstances of Jesus' birth were about as far away from what most people here experience as we can imagine. But this was a special baby, born at a special time and in a special place. But even then, what happened wasn't normal. Because this baby was not a gift just for his family, but for the whole world. Jesus was born for the poor, for the young and the old, for the outsiders and for family. He came as a threat. But Mary's experience that we hear was so far away from what even she would have expected. Then, when a mother was about to give birth, she would have been isolated from the rest of the world and surrounded by the women of her family or village, who would support her and look after the baby in its first few hours. The first visitors would have been family, and the baby would have been passed around the men who had also gathered waiting to hear whether this child was a boy or a girl. Instead, Mary crossed the desert, we're told, only with her husband. Exhausted, And with no one she knew to help her, she went into labour and gave birth. And then these poor dirty shepherds showed up. And to be explicit about this, the shepherds who were left in charge of the fields at night were the youngest and the poorest ones, because those who could go home to their wives did, and they left the others out there to make sure the sheep didn't come to harm in the night. But this was a child shared with the world from the day of his birth. The census may have been a decision made by a powerful man outside of the circumstances that Mary and Joseph could control. But by taking that journey, Mary and Joseph found themselves a long way from home, from friends and family. And we hear that she listened to all that went on, and she paid attention to the people who came to visit her baby. We don't know why Joseph was alone in travelling from Nazareth to Bethlehem. In fact, it probably doesn't make sense that he was. He probably lived in Nazareth with some members of his family. But they weren't Mary's family. And for those of you who've been close to a family member having a baby, you'll know that it's the mother's family that tends to gather round, and the other parent's family is always secondary. They are welcomed, but they're normally the second round. So Mary was alone. She had her husband, who probably knew no more about having a baby or giving birth or supporting than any other man at that time, because men weren't in that space. And really, despite the best looking pictures, I don't think the cow and the sheep were very helpful. So then we come to the angel who visited these poor young shepherds out on their hill and prompted them, so badly shocked them that they abandoned their job. They only have one responsibility, and it's to make sure those sheep are kept safe overnight. And they abandoned that job to go and see what all this fuss was about. Now, babies didn't survive very well then. So the birth of a baby was exciting, yes, but not something that random strangers would have got too excited about, or certainly not gone to see. So they must have been really shocked. And yet, when they got there, and they certainly wouldn't have expected to rock up to someone's newborn baby and say, "Hi, we're just here to say hello." Because I tell you, I don't know about you, but I don't know many parents that say, "Oh yeah, come in," at that moment. But in her moment, when she probably needed quiet and privacy, she opened up her family to the world, to the outsiders, to those who lived on the edge of society, because they had come to see her child. They had come to see Jesus. Today, if we follow Jesus, if we listen to the story of Jesus' birth, and we don't focus on the nativity version with the tinsel and the away in a manger and all of the carols, and instead we hear about the dirty shepherds, not with tea towels on their heads, but the young men who were the poorest in their society who were working. We must hear that they were the ones who were invited in. That in those first days, it was the outsiders who were welcomed in to see that baby. Because unto us, all of us, everyone, no in-crowd, No special treatment. No ticket that comes with wealth or access. Everyone was welcomed in to greet this child, because this child came to the world for all of us. Amen.